I'm William Sternod, and I will be giving you a lecture on the storytelling as it relates to leadership, and because this is the purpose of this conference is business and economics sort of focus, which is very interesting. I feel at home here because in my veins I have the blood of 7 European countries. I'm an American, yay. And apparently my ancestors loved everybody. Something like that. So, a little bit about I'll first introduce myself a little bit. I'm, as I said, I'm an American, and I've spent most of my adult life outside of the United States, actually. My hometown is New Orleans, Louisiana. Anyone? Yeah, New Orleans. Famous for? Jazz. And actually, Interview with the Vampire, Diane Rice. She's my hometown is interesting because it's if anybody has ever been to New Orleans, you should go. I mean, it was a French and Spanish colony, and it shows in the architecture. In fact, I have French and Spanish blood. It's very mixed up. The French and Spanish blood that I have were people who were living on a place called the German coast. And they all spoke that. My father's side are more Czech and Swiss, and probably one other nationality. But I grew up in New Orleans, famous for jazz and really good food. I grew up eating rice all the time. I thought rice was normal, and I was informed by some of my friends from a different part of the United States. Yeah, we don't eat that very often. What's wrong here? My mother cooks that, so I said okay. It's very famous for its food, and one of the interesting things about my hometown that its claim to fame is that New Orleans is rated by many to be America's most wanted city. There are more ghosts per square kilometer in New Orleans, Louisiana than any other city in the United States. It's pretty cool. So the paranormal is normal. So, in my family we have fortune tellers and mediums. We talk to the dead. It's wonderful. We see stuff. So but I grew up around that, and that was part of my life as such. In a previous professional incarnation, before I was a university lecturer, I was in the military for 22 years. So I spent a total of 19 years of my adult life in South Korea. I think Korea. And one of my jobs was interviewing North Koreans when they come to South Korea. So if you ever want an interesting job where you believe that George Orwell's 1984 vision it's alive and well in North Korea. So I used to have to talk to North Koreans about their experiences. Interesting work, okay? So that's where I spent 19 years, and I spent the last almost 17 years here in Poland. So, and I occasionally go back to the United States to check on it, and then I come back quickly because sometimes I don't like what I see, but that's another issue. Currently I'm currently here at the Adam Mickiewicz University in the Korean department. I teach Chinese characters for Korean and I get modern Korean courses in modern Korean history, also humanities and social sciences and English. A number of different kinds of courses. How old are you guys, by the way? Your demographic? How old are you? What I was going to say, the one thing that struck me about Polish people generally was they were quiet. Is that for some of you from different?
I have the same feeling.
The same feeling, yeah. The same.
The students.
They're quieter. I can't quite explain it, and it's that's the one thing that struck me, and the fact that okay, for you Polish students, you know what yamnik is, right? Yamnik.
Yummy.
Yamnik. Yes.
The dog.
Yes, the dog, the dachshund, the long sausage dogs. Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so here's the story. My first afternoon in Poland, 23 September 2002. I visited Poland. I'm walking around Poznan here in the city, and because I'm a dog lover, I count breeds. It's kind of an intellectual hobby I have. Oh, terrier. Oh, I don't know what breed that is. Oh, I'm sitting here counting. It happens to be that there's a lot of, okay. Whatever language, you know the dogs that look like little sausages with the short legs? That's what we're talking about. Dachshund in English. We use the German word. I counted 29 in about 3 hours. I said, I was with my fiance, who was my wife, Sue would be my wife, and I said, you know, you guys have a lot of those sausage dogs. My wife says, what are you talking about? You know. And I said, well, that one? Well, she said, that's a yummy. I said, oh yeah, that's the sausage dogs. Why do you have so many? Because that's a lot. And I don't know why. Anybody have any guesses of why? They're popular. So, yeah, but that was the first thing. Those 2 things, the fact they have a lot of dachshunds and the fact that Poles are quiet, just struck me. Because of course, in the United States, depending on where you're from, and depending on the ethnic community, it could be quieter than Poles, or it could be more noisy. But my family is really loud, all the time. And sometimes my wife's family asks me why I'm screaming. And I go, I'm not. And she says, but you talk so loud. Oh, I love this. For some of you from different places, my family, we talk with our hands. Like this. And my wife says, don't do that. Why? Because it looks like you're upset. But I'm not. But, you know, yeah. Oh, and I know, the other thing, at the time I was a vegetarian, so they asked, and I didn't drink alcohol, they asked me what was wrong with me. So that was, hey, you don't eat meat, and you don't drink? What's wrong with you? As far as I know, a lot of things, but that's not one of them, so, okay. All right, so we're gonna, once we get the, I'll tell you what, we're gonna dive into this, unless, let's just wait so everybody you guys can follow along with what I'm talking about. Okay, again, this is storytelling in business and business management, so that's what it's designed for, and I will walk through this with you, and I'll read portions of this. A story or narrative is an account of a series of related events, experiences, or the like, whether or true or fictitious, okay? It could be true, it may not be true. It does not matter. It's a story or narrative is simply the telling of some event, experience, or whatever. I've given you some word origins in case any of you are interested in that. Narrative psychology, I just wanted to make a pitch for this, because this is something I actually work with. Starting in the 1970s, narrative psychology became, in the 1980s, narrative psychology became an important field, and it has had since then an impact on scholarship and, interestingly enough, areas such as politics and business. One of the central pillars of narrative psychology is that human knowledge and the interpretation of experience in our minds is told as a story. Okay? And so cognition, our understanding, our perceptions are told as stories. And this has come to be applied in fields such as business management, but also politics. So if you tell a story, you inevitably are saying something. You have internalized a structure of some kind. Okay. So think about this. Think about a couple that gets married. They're standing on the day of their wedding. They're exchanging vows, and they are in effect living inside of a story. Okay. They met, presumably they fell in love or something like that. Okay, that's part of the story. It brings them to this point, and now because they're in a story, there is a past, there is a present, and there is a future. For all of you, if I were to ask you, most of you, to draw the past, present, and future, to draw time as a spatial representation, most of you would draw a line. And because of you come from cultures, this is just an aside, but because you come from cultures that read from left to right, most of you will draw past, present, conceptualize it that way. If you're Arab, if your mother tongue is Arabic, you will not, because you will go past, present, future. Israel is confused. You have the influence of Hebrew, but also European Jewry. Chinese is very interesting. Why? Past. When they use words about time, they conceptualize it in a vertical, descending vertical line. Okay. So the theory behind narrative psychology, which is part of what we're talking about here, is that you can understand and therefore communicate better through storytelling. And as I said, part of the application of this, the use of this, is in business management. So that's why this term storytelling leadership is important. And very often, as I said, I was in the military for 22 years. And being in the military, my leaders almost always had stories. Some of them weren't very good. But the purpose of the story is to illustrate a point. And to make you remember it, and make you, hopefully, you can emotionally connect with that. I quote here Peter Gruber, he's an entrepreneur and academician at Harvard University. He writes about 4 truths, so-called, of storytelling, okay, in business and business management. Truth to the teller, to the audience, to the moment, to the mission. I will explain each of these. He says a good story is that there is a sincerity, a realness, and some aspect of some story being personal to the storyteller. Okay? Think of it this way: what you're telling the story about may not have happened to you, but you nonetheless internalize it in a personal way. Okay? And that it should be real. And that comes across very often when you're trying to communicate stories. Next, audience. This is interesting because he's suggesting that audiences, when you're telling a story, expect a narrative structure. So a story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. That's the key to a story. It must have a beginning, a middle, and an end.